I'm seeing more faces back on the screen, Gerry, if you want to take us away for our last hour.
Okay, good. This is called The Art of Facilitation. It's an interesting title because it truly is an art. An art requires skill. I want to just share with you the simplest definition of facilitator, which is to ease the process. So what that means when you're facilitating a group is you should look incredibly relieved and relaxed and emerge exhausted, because it requires a lot of focus, a lot of intention, this is the tough part, particularly in the kinds of work that you do. It is much easier to be a facilitator when you're an outsider. So in my work as a consultant, as an organizational consultant, I am an outsider. When I say it's easier, it's because when you're an outsider, you do not have a stake in the outcome. Whatever is decided will not affect you personally in the morning. So you can really pay attention to the process. When you're an insider, which most of you are, which I have been, it's much more difficult because you do have biases. You do have hopes. You do hope that things will go in a certain direction. The best I can tell you to do when you're in that situation is to put those biases and/or hopes on the table. Let people know. I mentioned earlier about body language. If you don't help people, it will show anyway. If you feel like you can be completely objective and all of a sudden it goes into a direction where you can't, say so. That doesn't mean you can't continue to facilitate, but it does let people know where you stand. Good facilitation, some people say, makes a difference between success and failure, which is an enormous burden. I don't know if it's that definitive, but I can tell you that the major reason it makes a difference is there is a difference between content and process. Content is what you're talking about, and process is how it's going and how it's happening. As an aside, I would suggest if you're doing this on a regular basis, please, at the end of every meeting, or maybe every 5th meeting, you pay attention to process. We talk about content all the time, sometimes things we could email or we could write to people, but stop for a few minutes. How are we doing? How is this working? Again, you heard me say earlier, or some of you did who were on, people neither say they don't need their way, so they may make a suggestion that is uncomfortable for you or for the group. Acknowledge it, say so, wish we could do it. I've heard facilitators say, any suggestions? And people say you need to do 1, 2, and 3. And their answer, honest answer, is I can do 1, I can probably do 3, I'm not sure I can do 2. Again, at least it gets the conversation on the table. When you're facilitating, people, I'm going to share some of the questions people ask me, and then again, we're going to open it to your questions if I don't answer them already. People will say, what happens when there's a lot of emotion in the group? We have this, whether it's at work or it's in volunteer organizations, this adage that we talk about on a regular basis, which is you have to leave your emotions at the door. When I go through a door, I do not see a receptacle for emotions. I don't know where you would put them. And aren't you worried you'll take the wrong one when you leave? You say, man, I came with emotion, you won't believe the doozy I left with. We have one brain, there's nowhere to put that. The other thing we talk about a lot is whether someone has a right to have an emotion. Emotions aren't right or wrong. They simply are. They simply exist. You've probably been in this situation where you've been in a meeting or you've been in a group and people say you have no right to feel that way. Has that ever worked for you? Have you ever said, oh, thank you, I hadn't thought about it. I'll put it aside. Of course not. So what we need to do is respond to it. Now, here is an easier way to do it than to try to empathize. I mean, if you can empathize, wonderful. But sometimes we just try to do that. We need to acknowledge that people are experiencing the emotion. We don't need to understand it. We certainly don't need to share it. They just need to know that you know that's happening. When we respond logically to emotion, it's like talking Spanish to French-speaking people. They hear the words, it doesn't integrate. So it's really a matter of sometimes you end up with an agenda that you have to put aside because I never thought this was going to happen or this was going to come up. Pay attention to it, focus. When people realize it's been acknowledged, they often say, okay, what can we do about it? And they move to the logic. Now, anything I tell you or anything that you read has to feel comfortable for you. It has to integrate with your personality. That's why I said earlier in the first session, take what makes sense, throw out what doesn't, put on the shelf what you want to take down someday. I'll give you an example. I was on the phone with an organization. I needed some information. They couldn't give it to me, so I got a little bit upset. And the woman on the other end said, oh, we're upset now, aren't we? Really? First of all, what's with the we? No, I was upset. I didn't think it was a we. So I got a little more upset. And she said, oh, we're really distressed now, aren't we? I hung up the phone. I said to one of my partners in our organization, it sounds like she's been to one of my workshops and I can't stand her. So it has to really come from the heart. And if you do not understand what's going on, ask and say, I was surprised by that. I'm not sure that I expected that. Can you say more? Can you tell us more? And again, people will feel acknowledged, and that's what counts. So as we talk about this, we're really moving into what are the challenges of facilitating. Your key responsibility as a facilitator is to navigate a group process in a safe environment. Is it safe to say what I believe? Is it safe to disagree? Is it safe to be upset or distressed? Is it safe to be happy and delighted? And that is your job when you're facilitating, is to make sure that people are as comfortable as they can be. Now, what causes the challenges? The first is the resistance to change. When you're talking, when you're meeting, you're usually talking about changing something. That's the reason we're moving forward. That's why we're activists. That's what we may be changing how we're processing our own organization. Positive change is just as stressful as negative change, which I know sounds counterintuitive. How many of you have had new computer programs in the last few years? Just raise your hand. Right. Remember the first 3 weeks? It's a nightmare. Yesterday you were competent and today you're not. That's what I mean when I say people resist change. People, we resist change. Try this, everyone. Fold your hands if you would. Look at what thumb is on top. Now unfold them and refold them with the other thumb on top. Doesn't it feel weird? When I'm with a group of people, I often hear people say to the people next to them, you're doing it wrong. Like there's a protocol for this. Fold your arms. Look at what arm is on top. Now unfold them, refold them with the other arm on top. It's so uncomfortable. I did this once and it must have been 10 minutes later and I heard this guy say to the guy next to him, can you help me? So they're little things. This is not major, these aren't major issues, but consider this. If you had to fold your hands a different way or fold your arms a different way, do you know how much energy that would take in the course of a day? Do you know how many times you would do it the other way and then have to change? So this is what I mean. When we are going through change and people are resisting, which is usually the case, we can either keep pushing at them, or we can, obviously it's a metaphor, put our arms down, walk with people or with the person, and instead of pushing at them, walk with them and say, what do you know that I'm not appreciating? And the person might say, if we do this, we're really going to mess things up in those other teams. That's important information. Or they might say, this is something we're not capable of doing. We need more training. That's more information that you need in order to process this. What we have a tendency to do is to resist people who resist. And I have a working title of a book now saying it makes no sense to treat people the way we hate being treated. And so if we're upset when people are pushing back and we push back at them, that's exactly what we're doing. I'm also asked about what to do if you have someone in the group that you're facilitating that may be monopolizing the conversation. If there's someone in the group and someone keeps talking everyone else is going to be thinking, oh, the facilitator should really stop this. The facilitator should stop that person from doing it. If I'm the facilitator and I say to that person, you have to stop, other people want to talk, I can pretty much guarantee you no one else will talk because it could happen to them. Conversely, if I say to that person, I can tell what you're saying is important because it looks like 3 or 4 other people want to jump in. What you're doing is acknowledging that that person is important and inviting other people to jump in without embarrassing the person, without putting the person on the defensive, and I dare say everybody else on the defensive as well. What happens when someone drifts off topic? Let's imagine we're talking about activating in a certain way and someone says, you know, I saw a movie the other night. Now your first thought, and everybody else's first thought, is a movie? We're not talking about movies. For that person, there's a connection. How about if we say to that person, what about what we're talking about triggered the thought of that movie? Because it is not up to me to say there's no connection. Of course there is, or the person wouldn't have talked about it in the first place. Again, what we're doing as facilitators is integrating people rather than marginalizing them. We also talk about agenda, and I hear this all the time. People say, I'm setting the agenda, and I'm always interested in the I, in the facilitator setting the agenda. How about if we ask people to contribute to the agenda? And then we look for the underlying themes, if that's our job, and come up with it. Now, I know you probably have agendas with times on them when you're facilitating a group. Understand those times are completely arbitrary. You could set something aside for 5 minutes and it could take an hour because it triggered all kinds of other thoughts. You could put something for 40 minutes, it only took 2 minutes. What I say to facilitators on a regular basis and presenters is come in with 2.5 times what you need and be willing to give 3/4 of it up. What facilitators do is they are focused on the group, not on the piece of paper they came in with. It is a guide, certainly, and if people have contributed to it, you have more of a chance of getting through it. And speaking of when you end and timing, I would suggest that if you say we're meeting from 2 to 4, that you end at 4 o'clock. And here's the reason. If we meet every other week from 2 to 4, and at 2 minutes to 4, someone brings something up and we say, oh, that's really important. Let's continue to talk about it and stay another 10 minutes. And then 2 weeks later, someone brings something up and you say, we don't have time, we have to end. What that person is going to think is, well, apparently that other person was more important than I am. So it's not just for everyone's sake so that they understand the time parameters, but it's for the people who had to be turned off or shut off, which we feel really badly about. And then can we find another way to integrate what's important to them? I'm also asked often about how we make decisions, whether it's consensus or it's vote. I can tell you that voting takes seconds, sometimes minutes, but usually seconds. It takes seconds because we say how many people want something. 51% of the people raise their hands and that's it, it's done. Except 49% of the people are not happy. 49% of the people may even sabotage it down the road. Consensus takes a very long time up front and no time out the other end. And very few hurt feelings out the other end. So what consensus is I can live with it. It's not, by the way, oh, fine, I'll live with it. It's truly, I can live with it. Conversations happen. If you've ever been on a jury, you know this. You have 12 people on the jury, 11 people want one thing, and there's one person not. Having the continued conversation is not waiting for that one person to come over to the other 11. It's what it is possible this person will be compelling enough so 11 people go over to that person's perspective inside. So the idea, again, is you're doing a lot of work up front, but people leave fine with what has happened. And that's what you want, and you don't have a lot of talk afterwards, and you don't have a lot of pushback afterwards unless it's from people who weren't there and didn't appreciate it. So as long as we're talking about decisions, because as a facilitator, you're often facilitating that, I hear regularly people say, we still haven't made a decision about something. We met 3 times, we haven't made a decision. There's no such thing as no decision. No decision is a decision to leave things the same. If you say, I haven't decided to buy a new car, yes, you are. You have decided. You're driving the old car. When this continues for 2 sessions or 3, and we still haven't made a decision, please stop everything and do what we just talked about. What would be the downside of moving forward? What would be the downside of going in this direction? Now, it's not just a matter we have 17 things on the yes list and 4 things on the no. It's what is most compelling. Get that information out. What are the trade-offs? What do we need to do to accommodate? And when we're in a situation where change is an issue because societally and globally it's an issue, as we are right now, I can tell you that people will make fewer decisions. And I think we're all doing that in our own lives right now. And the other day we were putting a grocery list together and I thought I had never spent this much time on a grocery list. Why is this taking so long? And it's taking so long because we're on hold. And so society, whatever is going on in society, does affect what goes on in your meetings, what goes on and what you're facilitating. Keep in mind, we talked about this a little earlier too. People may have different response times. So I talked about different learning styles in the first session. There are also different response times. Some people can respond immediately. Some people need a long time. Some people, when given a long time, come back in a short time because the pressure is off. And what I've seen, mostly in volunteer organizations, is someone comes back to the next meeting and says, I was thinking about what we talked about. And I start rolling, saying, oh, we talked about that 2 weeks ago. Well, for that person needed the process time. Now, are you doing this only for that person? No, because if we do not let that person contribute, we're all missing out as well. Again, when you're in your forming stage, you might want to say, not only what is your learning style or how do you operate, but what is your process time? And that begins to explain to people. I also am asked often by facilitators is, what do you do when you're judgmental about what people are saying or how they're acting or how they're responding? I believe that worse than being judgmental is being judgmental and not acknowledging it to ourselves. There is a difference between, I'll use the ultimate judgment, which is racism and social injustice. There is a difference between being being discriminatory and acting on it. So if I'm prejudiced, I have a generalization about a group. If I act on it, I'm discriminating against that group. The only way to stop myself from discriminating is to acknowledge that I have that judgment. And that's not easy. And when you're a facilitator and you feel yourself doing that, please just acknowledge, apparently when people talk like this or act like this or whenever this person does it, I have a visceral response. Acknowledge it to yourself because it's yours to deal with. It is not theirs to deal with. So what I'd like to do is to go to questions and comments. And as you heard earlier, I'm an only child, so if you disagree with me, you'll probably win. Let's get some questions, and then there are a couple of other things I'll say toward the end. Did you get any, Olivia?
There was just a lot of people agreeing with you about dealing with monopolies or your great insights or you're phenomenal. So not
let's keep talking. I'm cool with that.
We can go to Kiri, which was like emotions equal umbrella. Kiri, I don't know if you want to expand on that and make it a question.
Hi, Gerry.
Hi, Gerry. Thanks so much. This has just been an awesome experience listening to you in a professional context. No, it really resonated with me that when you said, when you walk into a room, you don't see a container to put your emotions. And what if you take the wrong ones on the way out? That's all. I just thought that was funny and a great observation.
And it's particularly true in volunteer organizations because there is a huge emotional component for most people.
I think that's really true. because you're emotional about the subject. I mean, so much more emotional probably than when I was in business or academia. So yeah, it's true. Things can get hot just because you're emotional about the subject.
Right.
So I see Louise Spencer's hand up, and Kate Kuhn is raising her hand on video too. So
Okay.
go to Louise and Kate. And I also know that Billy had a question in the last session that we didn't get to. So
Okay.
we can maybe make that stack.
Sure. Louise?
Hi again. Thank you. So what do you do when things kind of go off the rails and you know go in with the best facilitation ideas and then you find that things are just not going the way, you know, and you can feel it in the moment.
Right.
How do you address that kind of situation?
I can tell you how I do it. It doesn't mean that it works for everybody. I say so. What I realize is, I'm glad you used the term off the rails. When it's going off the rails, it's my rail that's going off of. I mean, I had decided, apparently, didn't even know that at the time, by the way, that it was going to go in a certain direction. And sometimes we are prepared. We prepare ourselves for what if people are upset, or we know there's some discontent, or there might be some arguments. But think about this, that preparation is fantasy. We really have no idea how that's going to take place or how it's going to go. So when we're surprised, you keep hearing me say your body language will show it. To pretend that it isn't, first of all, that means we're lying to people. And secondly, I think they need to know. If I say, I have no idea what to do right now because this was unexpected. Now, that's implying that I would know what to do if it was expected. That doesn't necessarily mean so. How about if we stop everything and say, what's happening? What's going on? I am going to share, you're going to hear me break my own rules. I'm going to share some communication statements that do not work. One of them is why questions. And by the way, the only difference between people like me who do this a lot and other people is we do the same thing everybody else does. We just know why what we did didn't work. So why questions, which are questions we ask all the time. Most people receive that as accusations, not questions. Now, if you're in my group and I say to you, why didn't you do this? Why wasn't the report in on time? Why are you asking that? Those really aren't questions. What I really mean is I'm upset that you didn't do it. I don't like that the report wasn't on time, and I'm not sure I'm happy with what you're asking. And we ask 4-year-olds why they spilled milk on the floor. Is there an answer to that you find acceptable? Like I hated the tile? What is the answer to that question? The 4-year-old says, I don't know. And the 14-year-old says, I don't know, duh. And the 40-year-old says, I don't know. So how about when that happens, we say, of course you said that. And this is what people often say, what if I make a mistake? How about it, let's call this a mistake for the moment. How about if I say, of course you said that, let me try it again. Can you tell me what you were thinking? Can you take me through your process? Not only is that a better way to ask, but the message to you is that I'm trying. Have you ever left a meeting or a conversation thinking I should have said this, I should have said that? Yeah, it's what I call shooting on ourselves. It takes a minute. If I come back and say, you know, yesterday I should have said this, what you think is you thought about that overnight? You care enough about our relationships to bring that up again? That's the message. Even if we never get to a place where we have consensus, we never get to a place where we agree. The statement is, I care. So that's why many of you know about this, I messages versus you messages, YOU. You can't see me pointing, so I'll point to you. Look how big my hand looks, man, it's crazy. A you message is you're doing this, you always do this, there you go again. An I message is when you raise your voice, I shut down and I don't hear half of what you're saying. I haven't said there's anything wrong with raising your voice. What I've said is, I do that when people talk loudly. And you're much more likely to accept that because I haven't pushed you against the wall, I haven't criticized you. So we does not work, by the way, it's Queen Elizabeth's we. means the entire country feels this way about what you're saying. So we really need to take ownership. So hopefully you're getting the ideas. It's usually not personal. It is personal when someone says, I have something to tell you, don't take this personally. Isn't your stomach in a knot when someone says that to you? And by the way, here is another reason that don't doesn't work. Our brains can't manage it, not easily. If I say to all of you, don't think about puppies, how you doing? If I didn't want you to think about puppies, I should have suggested you think about kittens. So by the way, that helps when new people are coming into your organization. Rather than say, don't do this, don't do this, do it this way, will be retained. If you ask people after the first couple of weeks what the do's and don'ts are, they have no idea because there's just so much information. And that was a long answer to a short question, Louise. What else?
Do we got Kate Kuhn?
Question when you talked about it's my rails that's going off. So I'm familiar with the monopolizer. I kind of know who that person is and how to deal. But I also have an interrupter, you know, and it's a pretty constant and pretty quick, and it happens sometimes in a public introduction and also all the time, and it throws my flow off. I mean, because it can actually, and in this particular case, I think there's a combination of innocence and maybe a desire to, you know, wrestle for control a little bit, but passive aggressive, I might even say. But so it always disrupts me, and I think, again, to your point, it's me. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out how to sort of deal with, you know what I'm saying, sort of the interrupter right even in the middle of a sentence. And, you know, I'm just trying to sort of say, well, let's now, you know, get the meeting started to talk about something, and then interrupt. So it just is it's a rhythm disruptor. And the second thing is when you were talking about how to, I think it was in the why questions. I have a friend who's a consultant, and she says her most valuable question is, tell me more.
Oh, that's great.
I'm like, tell me more, tell me more. So I try to remember that. But anyway.
So the interrupter, I suspect other people know of this person and not your particular person. But in terms of people who interrupt, they're usually just in a different rhythm. I'm glad you used the term rhythm. They're in a different rhythm and they're thinking about something and it comes out. I don't know the people you're thinking about, you do, so you have to make a decision about this. If it's chronic and it's regular, I think you need to have a private conversation with the person. And I love the way you put it. You put it in terms of iMessage. You said, this throws off my rhythm, I'm not sure what to do. I was talking to someone who was facilitating and she had such a person in the room. And the person said, people are telling me that all the time. They tell me about that I interrupt, and honestly, it comes out before I think about it. And they arrange for her just to do this sort of thing. Carol Burnett, for any of us old enough to remember her, just a yank, and the person was like, oh, I'll ask it later. Because she could tell, the facilitator could tell when the person was ready to interrupt before it happened. And they had this wonderful choreography. Then the person stopped, and she would often call on that person. And I would suggest, by the way, for the people who need the most attention in the group, please give them the attention at the outset. What we have a tendency to do when people need attention is to ignore them rather than to give it to them. I have 2 minutes, I have 3 minutes, can we talk about that? Or maybe you call on that person first rather than last. Again, if you have a good conversation with the person, you might be able to. You notice I'm covering myself here. I don't want her calling me 2 weeks saying, thanks a lot, Gerry, I just made an enemy. I'm just covering myself.
Great.
If it's a one-time deal, that's harder to do.
Sarah from, I think it's Sarah from Antioch. Who had a
Yeah,
hand.
thank you so much for this. I just have a question going back to what Gerry said about setting up a safe environment for ideas and sharing emotions. Do you have any tips for setting up that safe space from the outset, I guess?
Yeah, are you from Antioch, New England?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, I taught there for 19 years.
Oh, no way.
A very
Thank
long time ago. There's no one there who would remember. It's a wonderful place. People ask about ground rules. I really admire people who have them. I don't usually set ground rules at the beginning. Hopefully we're modeling the way we want to be. But I think maybe if it's consistent, that you actually allot time on the agenda for that kind of conversation. Yeah, has anyone ever seen an agenda that said, just emotional falling apart, number 3? I know that sounds silly, but perhaps if it's consistent and if we require it, we acknowledge it and give it the time.
Okay.
How it goes. Again, it may or may not work. What I found is people are really shocked and surprised by that at the beginning. After a while, they get into it. When they say, oh, this is a time I can share that I was really uncomfortable when I went to the State House, whatever it is. So not just fact, but how am I experiencing the work that I'm doing? What else?
Did you, Joe Ellen had a question in the chat.
Yeah, I just had an experience with an individual who was coming up with ideas, was somewhat aggressive, but then expected someone to just take the ball and run with her idea. So how do you handle that?
So he was disappointed that people didn't pick up on it.
They were had ideas that wanted to be implemented. However, they didn't volunteer to implement. and
then was disappointed that it didn't happen.
Pick up the ball and run with it.
And I think we need to do that right there. So great ideas, let's consider it. Anybody wanting to take charge, and by the way, volunteering doesn't mean you do the whole thing. It means you're the person who's communicating with everyone else about this having to be done, or getting together in a subgroup. And when nobody says, I'll do it, then maybe that's the conversation. What's getting in the way? And other people might say we have other priorities, and other people might say it's just too contentious, I'm not sure I want to do it. Perhaps we need to take this off meeting and have a subgroup of people to talk about it. If the person says that this is what we ought to do and doesn't do it, that's usually because that person is insecure and actually making it happen, not because they don't care. And they're hoping for a partner or several partners. Oh, I think it's worth having the conversation of, seems like a great idea, how is it we're not running with it? You know, what's getting in the way? And the kind of thing you're talking about often is so emotional that people will say, it just worries me, it makes me nervous. Can we have that conversation too? People, again, if you're saying that's a waste of time, we don't have time to do it, I make the pitch again, do you have time not to? Because if that's getting in the way of the volunteer organization moving forward, it is the highest priority.
Great.
Thank you.
Bev Cotton had a question. Oh, Bev, you're still muted. There you go.
Yeah, I don't think I had a question, but I think that I think one of the most valuable things that you're telling me here today in so many places is just to stop and check in with yourself. If you're especially if you have a key role in the group, the meeting, the conversation, whatever that might be, and what am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling that way? You know, those quick little check-ins that really don't take much time, and the dealing with the monopolizer, and you know, why are they feeling the need to be that way? What can I do to help make that productive, instead of responding like, geez, I wish they would just be quiet, you know, or something like that. Just taking that breath, I guess, and looking at it from a little bit of a different lens than we tend to sometimes when we're not thinking about that. We're thinking about our message and our topic and getting this thing done.
Right.
And often don't think about the dynamic part of what's going on in the exchange.
And that also goes to checking in with yourself, but Emily had a question about checking in with others too. So maybe you could talk about checking in both ways.
So by others, I'm going to go back to the blame-free, gossip-free environment. I didn't mention this last time, and I should have. What I'm often asked is, what if I just need to vent? So let's imagine there's somebody who you feel is disruptive in your group, and you need to vent. Well, if you're venting about the same thing several times in a row, you're not venting, you're gossiping. The venting piece is, if I'm upset about something, there are two questions. What's going on with that person, and what's going on with me, and what is my part in this? Because the only reason that I think it's okay to vent, and that doesn't mean I don't do it other times, and I don't follow my own advice, the only reason I should be venting is to find out what is my part and what do I need to do about it. Now, if I can't figure out an answer, again, can we get together with the person or the people who seem disruptive or who are causing us issues? When I say, when we respond to people like that, what we're usually saying is, I never act like that. I would not do that. I was brought up not to interrupt. I was brought up to, whatever I was brought up to do. It's a judgment and sometimes a prejudice. So how can we stop everything again, talk about the process as facilitators, and say, what should we do? I've heard people who come across as aggressive who say, I expect when I'm aggressive, people will be aggressive back. It never occurs to me that I'm shutting people down. I think that they need to articulate that. That's theirs to do. And I know it's not always easy. However, if you're facilitating, what the audience is doing or the group is doing is looking at you to see if you're uncomfortable, if you're embarrassed, or if you're angry. And if you are any of those things, as we sometimes are, I think we need to get it out. I saw it again. Yes.
My question was about check-ins. In the Unitarian Universalist world, when we start meetings, we always have a check-in, and it's a brief time at the beginning of the meeting to say, what are you coming into the meeting with? What is on your mind? What might be affecting your presence at this meeting? And as you said, it sometimes takes a lot of time, and we think, do we have time to do this? But we know that it's well worth it, and gives someone a chance to vent if they need it, and it gives the person who wants to monopolize conversation at least, a minute or two to do that, and it helps.
Right, and it also explains behavior, doesn't it? If someone says, I've had the worst week ever, I have all these things going on in my life, you then say, well, no wonder that person is quiet, or no wonder that person is upset or distressed. It makes a huge difference. Again, not an excuse, but an explanation. In terms of responding to people, this is sort of an underlying theme. I would never talk while you were talking. But if I'm coming up with a response while you're talking, I am talking while you're talking, I'm talking to myself. It is so hard to be absolutely in the moment. Now, often I'm doing that because I care, because I want to help. But if you say, I have a problem, and you get halfway through and I'm saying, as soon as she finishes, as soon as he finishes, I'm going to say this. I haven't heard the last half of what you're saying. And everyone will know that I'm not paying attention. In the same way, even when you're on the phone, have you ever noticed if you lose someone for 2 seconds, you know they're not quite with you anymore? So the best thing we can do is, let's imagine we don't have a lot of time. And someone says, I'm going to do this, and say, we have 2 minutes, but it's all yours. It is so rare that a human being pays attention 100% to another human being for 2 minutes. Most people don't need all that. It's why people will often say they'll talk to you and you're truly listening and focused. You haven't said a word, and at the end they say, this is the best conversation I've ever had. Thank you so much. I'm going to send everybody with a problem to you. I never said anything. That's because most people know the solutions to their problems. They don't always know how to get there. And once they talk it out, they've answered their own questions. I often use little kids as an example because kids are the graduate school of life. When they're yanking on you and you say, no, I can do this, and listen to you, they know better. If you turn around, sit down, focus on them, often they walk away because they were just checking. But they know that though we can multitask, we are not 100% there. We as adults know that too, but we excuse it. And yet we still feel as though there wasn't the attention paid. Then back to what I said about being a facilitator, that's the job of a facilitator. Absolute focus, absolute engagement, 100% there, no matter what else is going on in my life right now, I can't do anything about it. So you folks are the only people who count. Yeah, it's actually rather relaxing. And then when that part is over, we get back to the rest of our lives. Other questions or statements or pushback, feel free.
There was one earlier in the chat from Brian about naysayers.
So Brian, are you on?
I am. I've had people say, well, you know, and you always have in town meeting, you have the people sit in the back row that are the naysayers, right? And they vote no on everything.
Right.
Every group has them.
Yeah.
But I found over the years that they can be a check and a balance, right, for any group. I'd like to hear your input on that and how to acknowledge their points of view and make it constructive as part of your moving the group forward.
I often wish they weren't in the back of the room. I wish they were in the front of the room. Best to put them on a committee that's dealing with the issues they have. If you, one of the exercises the facilitator I often do is what's working and what needs attention. You put a line down the middle. This helps if you're trying to find out how your group is working. Line down the middle, what's working, what needs attention. Some things are often on both sides. Communication, usually we're communicating, we could do better. And it's not about people, it's about concepts. Let's get it down. The best people to take those notes are the people who are the naysayers, because they get to put it down. And my favorite part when I'm wandering around and trying to figure out what's going on, my favorite part is to see them say something positive after they've finally gotten the negative down. It's a balance. And so if we have naysayers, terrific, they're bringing up the things that we're most concerned about. Then we have people who are very positive and bring it up. I'll say what I said earlier in the earlier session, together we are one perfect person. That is the reason we need this diversity. So showing some gratitude to the people that are naysayers often integrates them. Other people may say, I can't believe they even, what's she doing? What is he doing? Saying thank you to the person who's in the back of the room saying no. It's their comfort level. In the same way, some people say yes all the time. It's their comfort level. Yeah.
Great. Joel?
Gerry, you said that you generally don't come into meetings with a list of expectations of behavior, but you formulate them as you go along, or you model them. What do you think about creating a shared agreement at the beginning of the meeting where you give everyone the opportunity to express what they need in order to be heard and to feel safe, writing those down, putting it up on the wall, and then empower everyone to identify when they feel that they're not feeling safe because of a betrayal of those shared agreements?
No one knows better about this than you do, Joel, because of the work you do. I have heard, and you may have heard this, I've heard people say, I feel safe when people aren't yelling at each other, and other people say, I feel safe when people are, because at least I know what they believe and think. So then how do we negotiate that? I think it's a wonderful idea. I think that means we have to follow it with negotiation. Because just because we have it on the list doesn't mean that everyone's okay with it. And more importantly, just because we have on the list doesn't mean people can manifest it the way we expected them to. Using the safety as an example. I think that's a wonderful way to start. That's very different than coming in with your own ground rules, because those came from you.
Mm,
and other people did not buy into them.
right, right. And I like that idea of having a conversation about the agreements rather than just accepting every one as earning its place on the list. But I think there'll be certain needs that will be universal or close to universal, which is I want to feel heard. I don't want to be interrupted. I don't, I want to have the opportunity to think about what my response is going to be. So some people may need some silence, a period where we can all kind of collect our thoughts, because some of us are quick responders, some of us are slow responders. And we can accommodate all of that if we can negotiate a set of agreements that encompasses everybody's needs.
That's right. And again, what you're sharing is your personal styles, which helps enormously, because now you've just explained why it is you act the way you do. See, I just said why, I told you earlier not to, how it is that you come to this. And know that those agreements are in place as long as it's the same group. When new people come, or even when people leave, do we have to look at this again? And people will say often, you've probably experienced this, Joe, one of the things that's usually up there is respectful conversation. People say, I am respecting you. I told you what's wrong with you. That's respect. I wouldn't do that if I didn't respect you. That's a very different process than someone else who would say it more kindly or not say it at all. Now, I don't think it's a one-time deal. I think we do it at the beginning. Maybe we look at it for a couple of minutes every meeting. Maybe we reevaluate. And the point is, people know that we're trying. When you talked about response, I wanted to add to this. If you would like everyone to have a chance to weigh in, please tell them what direction you're going in, because people think, am I number 3? Am I number 4? Am I supposed to raise my hand? Really, if you want everyone to have a chance, go in a clockwise or counterclockwise so that they know exactly when they're coming up. And then you can go back again if people have other thoughts. I realize that we need to end soon. So I'm going to say a couple more things. Invite you again to email me. I'm very happy to respond if you do. It's Gerry at gerryking.com, Gerri. In terms of setup, and I leave this to the last because it's often what we forget. If you go into a room with a lot of people and they're sitting classroom style, when people are sitting classroom style, participation goes down 40%. Because you can't see how people are reacting to what you're saying, and it reminds people of school. If you have a large group, please put them at tables. The larger the group, the smaller the percentage of people who talk. When you're at a table of 5 or 6 or even 10 people, it's impossible not to contribute. So everyone will leave having contributed to the conversation. Again, with saying all this, we want everyone to contribute. Some people need to be silent. That's their call, and that's their choice. So I will end, because I know Olivia has some things to say that she wants to share with all of you. I don't want to be thinking behind your backs, so I'm going to tell you directly. I am so grateful for what you do. I am so grateful for everyone who's on here I know is contributing in some way. We know now that that's never been more important. So thank you for what you do every day. And if you feel unappreciated, know there's somebody here who's saying thank you, even if I'm not paying attention exactly to you today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Gerry.
No, thank you, Gerry, so much. We're grateful for your words of wisdom today. Today's session is recorded. The other workshops, which would have been the afternoon if we were together in Concord, some have been pre-recorded. So understanding the fundamentals of democracy reform, the redistricting workshop, and the money and politics public funding workshop have been pre-recorded. We talked about the fundamentals of organizing and moving people to action, a pre-recorded workshop from earlier this week. And coming up on April 9th will be a workshop on digital organizing as a skill that you needed. But we at Open Democracy are working to build teams, our volunteer teams, to advance our goals around getting big money out of politics, voting rights, and redistricting reform. And I know many of you are working to equip those teams and put your time and talent into them. So I thank you so much for participating and for going forth and going out to create the changes that we need in our communities. Today's handouts and recordings will all be found at opendemocracynh.org. If any of this stimulated ideas and excitement and questions, we really do encourage you to send us your ideas and energies and excitement. And we know all of this requires additional dialogue. So I wanted to ask if anyone had any feedback or thank you. You feel free to put it in the chat. What worked for you about this format of joining together by Zoom, and any other evaluating ideas, please feel free to chat them. And with that, I want to thank you all so much for giving up your Saturday morning to participate in this conversation and to go forth and create the change we need in the world.